Good morning and good evening to our participants. My name is Sandy Geyer. I'm here to welcome you into our webinar, and I'm saying this evening because in New Zealand it is our evening. We went on to daylight saving yesterday, and it is 8 o'clock in the evening on our side, and the first day of the school holidays. For our South African participants, it is, as far as I know, your last day of school holidays, but everybody who's in the room is here on a holiday. So welcome to you and wonderful to have you along with us. I'm just going to keep going and we will get past the welcomes. And hopefully by that time we've got everybody in the room. We do have over 40 schools with us this evening, so I'm not going to mention areas specifically, but welcome to everybody who is with us. Okay, I've got two co-hosts this morning, or let me rather say panelists, just in case anything happens while I'm presenting, because once I go into presentation mode, I can't see anybody. So we've got two people waiting to catch, and the first is Jean-Michel, and I'll hand you over there for a good morning and introduction.
Good morning, everyone, and good evening, everyone. I'm Jean-Michel. I'm the Business Development Manager at EnQ. So as Sandy said, I'll be in charge of the chat box if you wanted to make any comments in the chat throughout the presentation. And you can also use the Q&A. So if you have a question, either myself or Cecile will see it, and we'll just interrupt Sandy when appropriate, and she'll answer the question live, most likely. But that's probably it from me. I can hand it over to Cecile just to say hi.
Hi, good morning, good evening, everybody. Wonderful to be here today with you. Looking forward to it so much and to building relationships with everybody. I look after most of our teachers and our schools in South Africa. So I look forward to building relationships with you and us putting our value forward and seeing where we can support. Thank you.
Okay, so that's back to me, is it? Oh.
Before we dive in, let's start with Dr. T.
I have absolutely no idea where that's coming from. Okay, I have absolutely no idea where that came from, but but these things do happen online. So yes. Good evening again. So I'm just going to jump into the presentation. I very much have your time in mind and respect for that time. So we are planning for the webinar to be around the 45 minutes. That will probably be without the Q&A at the end. That's what I will be aiming for. So hopefully you can stay with us until the end. Also, just to let you know that we will be sending out the information slides. So all the slides that you'll be seeing this afternoon, this morning and this evening will be sent to you, so you don't need to hurriedly take notes. Welcome to the webinar attendees that have been on the previous webinars with me. There is a small overlap of content, but tonight, this morning, we are specifically having a look at the elected student leaders in terms of the content that we are covering. So just to quickly introduce myself for those attendees who have not seen me speak before at one of the live events or the previous webinars. As I said, my name is Sandy Geyer. Many of the South African attendees might know me as one of the co-founders of EnQPractice Publishers that we founded in 1996, 28 years ago, almost to the date. And I then went on to found EnQPractice in 2012 in New Zealand, where I specialized in looking specifically at the development of leadership. And my area of expertise was very much in entrepreneurial leadership. Something that, because we were so involved with the schools within South Africa, we also created a program called Circles of Empowerment. And I was working with staff in terms of leadership development within the staff and with student leaders at the request of many of the staff members. During that time, I was working with a lot of entrepreneurial leaders and I was working with a lot of student leaders. And I started to notice quite a big gap and a difference in the way that the concept of leadership was being practiced and experienced within the school environment, and then how it was being practiced within an entrepreneurial environment. Now, I'm saying entrepreneurial, bearing in mind that entrepreneurial leadership is really just an umbrella form of leadership. It's probably the most adaptive form of leadership that we could ever want to achieve, because entrepreneurs are in an environment that is entirely different to a school environment where there is no structure. And it really is an inside-out process of navigating an environment and ensuring that your followers are definitely following. And it's all about empowerment rather than a power or authority kind of approach. So it's a really good thing, I think, for everybody to have a good handle on, and certainly for our future leaders. So that's who I am and the work that I do. And I did complete a doctoral study at the beginning of last year, where I specifically researched the gap between the school environment and the entrepreneurial environment. So I'll be touching on that as we progress. The structure of the presentation is very simple. We're going to have a quick look at the concept and development of leadership theories, just to place that into some kind of context. Then we're going to have a look at the historical structure of the student leader roles, and those are the elected student leaders. Then we're going to have a look at how we approach the preparation for leadership and why at EnQPractice. I'm going to focus specifically on the elected student leader roles this morning, and how we approach that, if we can be of assistance there. And then I've got some data to share with you, which I've been researching in the field a number of years now, and we do have a very nice new data set. And there's some insights there that I think you might find interesting. So starting with what is leadership? And when it comes to a definition of leadership, it's quite a hard thing to define. I did come across a study that had found one definition of leadership, and it was 371 words long. So we don't have all day to unpack that. So essentially, when we're approaching leadership, one of the ways of looking at it is how it's evolved through the ages. And on your screen in front of you, I've created a very basic evolution of leadership theories that goes all the way back to the 1840s, where leadership was seen as very much a one-way effort. It was also believed at that point that you had to have certain traits to be a leader. So the belief was, I am a leader or I'm not a leader. And it was all based on what they called the great men theory, where they studied those that had been in leadership and said, that's what makes leadership. But that evolved through the period that we're looking at. And something that is quite significant to me in terms of looking at that evolution, and this was actually brought up in one of my live events by a history teacher. And she pointed out that the leadership styles were very much a response to the times. So as you can see them evolving, they evolved in response to the social, economic, and organizational challenges of the time. And that very much moved leadership from being this one-way street, trait-based, to a far more participatory kind of leadership. And I'd also like to just mention the fact that Westernized leadership is often seen as being, power and authority. And that is absolutely not true. That is a misconception. Whereas when we're looking at Western-based leadership today, and certainly from the 1960s, it's very, very much more participatory and adaptive based than we kind of giving it credit for. So another thing that occurred to me when having a look at this evolution is the fact that things like servant leadership, situational leadership, transformational leadership, they've been around for a very long time. And what we have noticed is in organizational leadership, which is in businesses after the school structure, that leadership has really evolved from the more one way, through to the kinds of leadership that I'm showing you in my screen. So in terms of what is leadership, these are simply my own thoughts. This comes from a number of years of research in the field and my own experiences, and talking with other researchers and sharing their insights. We know that leadership is very contextual. Leadership will look different in different contexts, in different situations. And what we also know is that if there's no active preparation for leadership, leadership will be understood and practiced as it's first experienced. And we know that for the majority of our leaders, our future leaders, that will be within the school structure. We're also being told that our future leaders are going to need to be adaptive leaders, and things like contextual intelligence, meaning understanding that a one size does not fit all, and that we have to be aware of our context in terms of appropriate leadership, and cultural awareness. Those are abilities that our future leaders are going to need to have. So that's what we're looking at in terms of how do we prepare our future leaders. Now, in the next part of the presentation, we have a look at the historical structure of the elected student leader roles, because that's what we're on the webinar for, in terms of having a good look at those. And this goes all the way back, and those that have been to my presentations before would have seen, me present this slide where it shows that the elected student leader roles first originated in the early 1820s, 1830s. By this gentleman, Dr. Thomas Arnold. And what is significant about the way that those roles were created was that they were specifically designed as a preparation for power. And it was by special invitation to a select few only. And that selection was based on whether or not they displayed certain traits. So the historical foundations of the elected student leader roles very much match the 1840s in terms of the evolution of leadership theories. And I'm just going to pop back to that slide for a minute, because what we can see from this is that in the 1840s, the one way, the more about power and authority was very much the way that leadership was done. And that's when the elected student leader roles were created. Organizationally, we have evolved in how we've looked at leadership. But the key question here is, have we evolved the elected student leader roles? Within the school structure, are there any aspects of the great man theory and the traits that we're still using? And why do we want to have a look at that? We want to look at that because will we be able to prepare our future leaders using the leadership structure that we have within our schools? This is not to criticize our school structures at all. The student leader roles are there for a reason, and it goes further than just our future leaders and deeper at the time. But I think the awareness from the schools themselves is critical to having a look and saying, well, maybe we could be doing more while we have those future leaders in our hands. And I certainly believe that. And when I did my own research, what I did was I took a sample of successful entrepreneurs at the time. COVID had just hit while I was researching. So I used those entrepreneurs that had successfully navigated COVID at the time as being the criteria for successful. And I had quite a robust sample in terms of a survey that we did, where we measured 8 sources of positive influence to their leadership success. So, and those are on the screen in front of you. So we looked at things that could have led to why they felt that they were successful. And what was significant around that data was that self-awareness came up as being the most positive influence to their successful leadership within that environment. And their experience of leadership whilst at school came through as being the lowest. Now, I'm going to show you some data, and don't get caught up in this data, but I've always been asked to provide data, so I like to do that when I can. And I just wanted to show you the top line, which is the mean score. And essentially, when we ask them a set of questions around self-awareness, self-leadership, social co-collaboration, which essentially just means collaboration skills. It means being able to work with other people and bring them in. We asked there were a number of statements that they had to strongly agree to strongly disagree to. And the strongly agree was a very low score. So if it was a low score, that was a very high source of positive influence. And you can see from the self-awareness that they would, in that case, very much have strongly agreed or agreed to the statements. For student leadership, you can see from the very, very high score that they would, in most cases, have disagreed with the statements. So that was a very important indicator to us in terms of saying, well, they really did not get much from their student leadership experience. And we didn't just ask questions, were you a student leader? It was things to say, I gained insights from teachers, from mentors, from sports coaches. So we cast the net quite wide. And then after doing the survey data, I did a number of interviews. I had 20 interviews in total, and there were 10 from New Zealand and 10 from South Africa. And I asked them questions about all the other aspects of the feedback that they'd given me in terms of their self-awareness and their self-leadership, because where I was headed on that was I wanted to create something that could prepare our future leaders with the traits that they had and do it at a critical time. And then the very last question was saying to them, how did your experience of leadership while you were at high school assist you with your entrepreneurial leadership role? And that's when the brevity, let me say, of the situation really became obvious, because in most cases, there was kind of the stunned silence because my question must have come out of the blue to them. But the comments that came back were, I got them into 4 different categories. And just to run through them very quickly, there were things like, well, I didn't experience leadership. I experienced a tie and a badge and a promise for my future CV. I didn't experience leadership. I experienced followship. The other one was, I learned what not to do. And then one of the most common comments was, especially on the entrepreneurs, I never really fit the school system, so I wasn't elected as a student leader. And looking back now, I think that was possibly a good thing. The reason that I bring that to the surface is simply to say that the gap that I was noticing when I was working in the schools and working in the entrepreneurial leadership field was coming through very strongly in my data. So it wasn't something that I was just seeing myself. And I also had personal experience of leadership at school and went through 2 very formal leadership roles, but came through those knowing very, very little about who I was, and then finding myself in an entrepreneurial environment with no structure, realizing that it took all of the first 5 to 6 years of us being in business to learn about who I was. And then there was the critical difference to making our business work. So that's what has come through the research. And in looking at the elected student leaders role now, the questions that I have for you to maybe just consider is, firstly, how are we selecting our student leaders? What's that process, and what are we looking for? So why are we selecting them, and why are we selecting those that we select? Then another key consideration is, what examples of leadership are we demonstrating to them by example? So what are they taking in terms of what we are showing them, as well as what we might be teaching them? And then the last question is, how does their context of leadership drive their learning of leadership? And I placed the photograph, the bigger one at the top. It was taken in one of the boardrooms of a school that I regularly trained the student leaders at. And the students would arrive, they were allowed to be in the boardroom for their student leader training. It was the first time that they were invited to the boardroom. And they would arrive in their ties and their blazers, and they would sit in this boardroom. And I would always notice with these student leaders that it would take so long to break down and to break past what they thought was expected of them in terms of who they were, before we could get to who are you, and how can we prepare you for this role, being the unique individuals that you are. So when I pose these questions, again, it's not as a criticism, it's just simply as an awareness. And the thing is that those that are on the webinar probably already have this awareness. So that's really good. And I think that that's really a good start in terms of bridging that gap and saying, is it possible to bridge the gap? And absolutely it is. So in terms of compiling the research and just putting in the key points, these are the points that came up from the research in terms of the other papers that I was able to access through my own study, and I've continued to research in it since then. So this is a stream of feedback that's coming through, and it's consistent. And within my own sample, I had an entrepreneur who was 23 at the time, and then I had somebody that was in their early 60s. So we had quite a diverse set of participants, and the messages were not that different. So that was just something maybe that we wanted to take cognizance of. And the key question that comes up is, how do we address this in a practical way? And is it addressable? And again, the answer is absolutely yes. So in answering this, I have a key consideration in terms of another thought, and that is very much saying, is leadership a doing thing or is it a being thing? And I'd like to just point to this lovely lion avatar that I've used here. And I know that one of our course developers is online with us tonight, and she's going to recognize this the first time that we've shown him. We've got a wonderful new course coming out called Path of the Lion, which was a book that I wrote in 2013 and have been training entrepreneurial leaders and student leaders for many years, but we're finally moving it to online. And the lion leader is the epitome of what we would call a being thing in leadership. So what do I mean by that? And essentially, when you have a being part of leadership, it means that you have what they call a personal leadership identity. Now, it's a very simple thing. If you have a personal leadership identity, you understand that leadership applies to you. If you do not have a personal leadership identity, you believe that only leaders do leadership and that leadership does not apply to you. The research consistently tells us that the majority of students leave school believing that only leaders do leadership and leadership does not apply to them. So this is definitely something that we want to have a look at in terms of placing what they call the personal leadership identity alongside their self-identity development. And as it turns out, the research also tells us that adolescents between the ages of 14 and 18 are perfectly placed in their self-identity development to develop a personal leadership identity from an inside-out process. So regardless of whether they have a formal role, it might just be self-leadership, it might be a communal, a church role, a social role, they will understand that leadership applies to them. And in terms of addressing this and framing this within my own study, I use something called integral theory. And integral theory proposes that in every one of our future leaders, be they educational, entrepreneurial, corporate, political, even just self-leaders, that there are 4 quadrants to that development. And integral theory is all about consciousness. And it says that in these 4 quadrants, we start with a low level of consciousness. And then as we grow up, we evolve in our levels of consciousness. Now, the 4 quadrants are I, we, it, and it's. And it's on the screen, and I probably don't need to explain that any further. But essentially, the way that leadership is currently being practiced at school and within the school structure falls into the top right quadrant, which is the observable leadership style. So what's happening there is that the majority of student leaders are leading by example. They're doing what they see around them and just following what's expected of them. And it's very much a doing thing in terms of a leadership role. Whereas where we want to move that is to the top left corner, which is all about the I. So that's where self-awareness sits, their value sits, their value set sits, their self-identity, their personality, and their characters and their traits. And that is moving leadership preparation and leadership development to a being thing. So that's an evolution of consciousness rather than just a skill set, do this and this and this and this. So hope that makes some sense. But integral theory was really the framing of my own thesis in terms of creating that personal leadership identity. So that's where we move leadership preparation to. The way that we did this was we created an online intervention that had 4 circles of learning, and that addressed self-awareness and then self-leadership. And then we looked at leadership through conflict. And then we had the positive influence of others. And this course is done completely online. It's completely self-paced. Very, very popular with the schools for their year 12 or their grade 11 students. The year 12 is the New Zealand grade, and the grade 11 is the South African one. It's the second last year of high school. So all students who put their hands up for leadership positions would do the first 4 circles first, because they could do it as part of the selection process, application process. They could do it at home. They had to pass certain quizzes to get their certificate. They could place their certificate as part of their application process. We are able to give schools a lot of feedback in terms of the communication styles of the students, their top 4 values, their feedback comments, when they finished the course, what they scored, all those kinds of things. And the first 4 circles is very much the creation of the personal leadership identity and the being of leadership. The reason that those 4 circles are designed in the way that they are is very much around creating a foundation for leadership traits. So when we ask a group of leader applicants or even corporate and business leaders who their most inspirational leaders are, the answer is always the same. It's Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, Oprah, Churchill, Jesus. And the question always comes out as to, well, why? And the reason is because they display certain traits. Now, a trait cannot be taught, but a trait can be developed. And the circles are specifically designed to create these traits, because these are the traits that come up all the time in terms of looking at our most inspirational leaders and our most respected leaders. So then we tag on circle 5, and that's where we move from the first 4 circles in the preparation of leadership to the preparation specifically of those in an elected student leader role. The way that the online courses run is we have a number of student actors, interactive videos and exercises, so that the students are led through by students that they feel are in their space. I'm obviously there too, and that sort of guides them through the concepts, but mostly they feel as if they're working with students who've been where they are sitting. So there's quite a significant level of understanding there. Once that is done, we look at the elected student leaders course. Now, this is done slightly differently, and this is very much why the majority of our participants are on tonight. So that course structure is in front of you, and I'm going to take you through it, and you will be emailed the structure afterwards as well to have a closer look. But essentially, this is not an online experience, the elected student leaders course. We did have it online for the first year, and we found that our schools much preferred to have a PowerPoint. The elected student leaders course requires there to be a guiding staff member in the room. And that is for a very good reason. That is because we need to facilitate discussions between the student leaders as a group. We've done the personal preparation work and the being is in place. But now we're looking specifically at the elected student leader role. We're looking specifically at a certain context, and we're preparing them for that context. So many of the schools saying, yes, but we want another voice in the room. So there is another voice in the room, that's me. I lead you through the entire course. We've done all the work. It's got a run sheet. There's a very comprehensive teacher's guide, and the preparation on the part of the facilitating staff member is very little. You really don't have to do very much before you're there on the day, because you can just look through the run sheets, you can look through the teacher's guide, and you're basically ready to go. Then it's a case of having a room that is set up in, I like to have the horseshoe shape so that they're all facing each other, and they're sitting at desks and they're facing each other, and we like them to move around a lot. So we start them off sitting where they like, and then we move them into communication style groups. But all the content and the discussion material is provided by us. And what the student leaders really enjoy about this course is the fact that they are able to come out with what they're thinking, and within their group discuss concepts and discuss plans and put a strategy in place, and really have the staff member there. We leave lots and lots of space for you to put in what you would like, because every school is different. And every school has slightly different structures and different expectations. So we don't want to completely take control of that. We actually want the school to play quite a big role there too, but how much of a role you play is entirely up to you. So the run sheet will keep you on time. Everything else is negotiable. So there are 3 modules in the Elected Student Leaders course. And the very first one is all about leadership as a philosophy. So what I did in this module was I looked at 2 polar opposites, and we took traditional leadership, which traditionally is what they call authoritarian leadership, and transactional leadership. Now, transactional leadership very much matches the structure of the student leader role, and that's in terms of the way that it was originally designed. And then we put in servant leadership as being an alternate form of leadership, because that can be very easily practiced within a school structure too. So if they've got the 2 on each side, they can have a look at the strengths and the weaknesses of both of those styles of leadership and discuss what they would feel comfortable with and what they think would work and why, because both leadership styles have strengths, but both leadership styles have weaknesses. So it's getting them to understand that leadership is really a worldview. It's a way that we look at the world in terms of how it works. And it just lays a really nice foundation for them. The next module is all about how each leadership group is unique. Now, in Circle 1 to 4, in Circle 1 specifically, they would have done their communication styles. And that is the very first grounding in terms of them getting to understand that they are quite unique. And there are essentially 4 communication styles that we work with. The theory of communication styles goes all the way back to Hippocrates. So it goes back a very long time. And there are a number of schools of thought that have come through. Two most commonly, one is known as Myers-Briggs, which I think a lot of people would have heard of. And it's really good, but it's got 16 dimensions. So that's not really practical in terms of using it within a group. So we use one that aligns to a communication style breakdown, which is very similar to one known as DISC. And we have the 4 different communication styles: the pioneer, the inspiration, the excellence, and the insight. And this screen just gives you, what's common about those styles. Now, from the first 4 circles, those student leaders would have done their communication style, and they would have looked in a great amount of detail in terms of what is unique about their style. That's good to know. But in leadership, what is more important is knowing how to positively influence the styles that are not the same as yours. So they would have had a really good look at how to work with the other styles, because that is a good knowledge set to have and a good skill set to have in terms of positively influencing students who have a different style to what you do. I'd just like to go back to the slide for a second here, because essentially what tends to also happen within the school structures is that those styles that step forwards and make themselves known right from early on in high school often get elected as student leaders, because they seem to be confident and they speak up and they seem to take charge. But the 2 more stand back styles, which is the excellence and the insights, also have really, really good things to offer in terms of leadership and being within a leadership team. So this is something that we sort of bring to light in those first 4 circles. And if you do have any of the more stand back styles, they are more willing to put their hands up afterwards in terms of looking at a leadership style, at a leadership role, because they understand that they are just as effective. They are just different. We also introduced the fact that there are very much different styles of leadership, and that essentially your leadership style is, we have said, contextual, situational, but it is also a personal choice. You will have different styles that are far more comfortable with different ways of leading and different styles of leading. And this tends to be one of the most popular parts of the course, although it's one of the most simple. I think it just really opens everybody's eyes to understand that what they've seen around them, they already would have seen different kinds of leadership styles and where they apply and where they work. So suddenly they have a skill set to work with, but one that resonates with their being of leadership in terms of how they identify as leaders. So that's essentially what we are offering in terms of the elected student leaders course. They do need to do the first 4 circles first. So if we do have a number of schools on with us tonight who have already put their student leader applicants through the first 4 circles and are now looking at their elected student leaders. We also have many schools on tonight who have not put their student leaders through the first 4 circles, but now have their student leaders for 2025. If you would like to make use of what we're offering, we would need those students to do the first 4 circles before you can run circle 5. That's very easy to do. We simply need their names. We register them to the site, and they can do that in the next couple of weeks. They can do it over the school holidays at the end of the year, and then you can pull them together for circle 5 early next year. Most schools choose early in the year for circle 5 because it really just summarizes everything that they've learned. It regrounds everything that they've learned from the first 4 circles. And they know that they need to come to circle 5 with their certificate from the first 4 circles. So they do. And they come and they are completely prepared. And then the time that they spend with you in the room, which is approximately 2.5 hours for the elected student leaders, they are then perfectly prepared for their role within that context. But those students have got a personal leadership identity. If you have utilized the first 4 circles for your student leader applicants, those that are not chosen as student leaders will not leave school believing that leadership does not apply to them. They will understand that leadership does apply to them, and they will also have a personal leadership identity in place. They just will not have had the experience of the student leader role. So in doing that, the school has then played a very vital part in preparing our future leaders adequately. Okay, we are nearly at time. I'm just going to take you through some data, which I thought was quite interesting to share. So over the first 2 years of my study, I gathered quite a good research sample from a grade 8 set of students and a grade 11, which is the year 12 and the year 9 in New Zealand. And we just looked at what their top 4 values were. And we have a way of selecting their top 4 values that it's done on a very time-driven activity, and it pulls it out of their subconscious minds, because we know from the research that values are our most subconscious part of our personality, and that they are in place by the time that we are 8 years old. But we do have a window through adolescence in terms of maybe readjusting those if we want to. So what was interesting is that the data that came up from 2021 to 2022 was, if you have a look at the top 4 values for the ages 12 to 13, family was very much driving, which would make total sense. First year high school, family is very important. But in the ages 16 to 17, second last year of high school, it all seems to be about friends and peers. And what was interesting to see was that essentially those values had not changed, which backs up the research to say that they are unlikely to change. But I just think this is good for schools to know, for those that are working with student leaders to know that these are the top 4 values that are coming through again and again within the schools. And that's what's really driving in terms of how students feel about things and what drives their decisions and their actions. So again, I'm not going to say what should be done with the information, but it's just really good to note. And in this research sample, it was very even between New Zealand and South Africa. Recently, though, in the last year, I had quite a lot of student leader applicants go through. We had over 1,000, and I pulled out a data set that showed the top driving value of 798 of those students, which is a very big sample set. Now, the majority of the students in this sample were from the South African schools. There are New Zealand schools represented, but not as high a proportion. What is interesting here is that family is, again, very much driving, but religion comes in as the second one. But then integrity and trust and loyalty and honesty are quite soon after that. So there wasn't a massive change, but just the one significant one in terms of how strong new religion came through. We then measured their second value, which is also very significant in driving feelings and actions. And again, family was right up there, and then followed with loyalty, honesty, integrity, and trust. And yeah, just again, very interesting to see that the patterns are still very similar. Then we had a look and we said, well, what were the majority of the primary styles from those elected student leader applicants? And what was really interesting is that the highest number of applicants were actually the insight style, which is more your stand back and observe quietly, very relationship-oriented style. And then followed quite soon after that with the excellence style, which is the very analytical, but also stand back and observe styles. And only then did you have the inspiration, which is the very charismatic, step forwards, make myself known style. And even lower than that is the pioneer, which is the more traditional step forwards, take control, very focused, very decisive kind of person. So in your student leader applicants, this is really good news because it's telling us that those stand back styles are being encouraged to step forwards into leadership roles. I have noticed within the groups that we have worked with, however, that when the groups are selected, we still have a higher showing of the pioneers and the inspirations than the excellences and the insights, not in every school, but in many of them. However, it is good to have a balanced group. So when they are trained within their roles, one of the things that we show them to do is how to balance the group and work to their strengths and value their differences using their styles. But I just thought this was quite interesting for you to know. Then what one of the schools asked us is, were you able to see any patterns with the top communication styles and the driving values? And we were. So we could see that excellence, top left, their top driving value is religion, and then followed by family, loyalty, and then integrity and trust, independence, honesty right after that. The insights, family was right up there first, and then followed by the integrity, trust, loyalty, and religion. The step forwards and take control and make ourselves known styles, the inspiration, which is relationship oriented, is very much family, and then followed by the integrity, trust, loyalty, and religion features very well there again. And our pioneers, family, and I forgot to highlight independence, which comes next. And that would be typical of a pioneer because they are very independent. But what we did see is that, yes, the different styles do reflect slightly different values in their top driving ones. But as a group, those differences are not significant. So those are influenced far more by the influences on their values, which is what we call mother, father, teacher, preacher. And schools do play quite a role there. So just in ending off, in the sample that was drawn, and here you see we've got 1,001 in our sample, we ask certain questions once they've done the Leadership Literacy for Life course, the first 4 circles. And this statement, only leaders do leadership, the fact that just about everybody disagreed with that quite strongly, is clear evidence that they have developed a personal leadership identity. The question on the left, leadership means having authority and power. The majority disagreed, which is again evidence of that leadership, a personal leadership identity, and understanding that authority and power does not equal leadership specifically. Many of them could see that the quiet and introverted communication styles could be as effective as outspoken and extroverted communication styles in leadership. Leadership means having a positive influence over others. For our adaptive leaders, for our future leaders, that is key. And we scored very, very well on that. So again, the evidence of the personal leadership identity. These are the learning areas in the 4 circles. And what's significant about that is simply the fact that there were none that were not popular. Definitely the ones that were most popular was learning about their own communication styles and learning about the different leadership styles. So that really, the content hits the mark very well there. So just to end off, these are the key ideas that have been discussed. I have gone 5 minutes over time. I apologize for that, but hoping to stay within an hour on the Q&A as well. But essentially, I'm not going to reread that slide. These are just the things that I have covered, and I hope that I have done so in a way that is easy for you to understand, and to understand how we could possibly work with you if you are interested to work with us in terms of this content, because that is very much the focus of what we are wanting to do, is to work with our schools to better prepare our future leaders, but in doing that, really well prepare our elected student leaders. So the key idea behind my work, again, is that leadership is an evolution of consciousness that happens alongside education. And yes, our schools do play a major role there. And thank you so much for taking the time to be on the webinar with me and consistently working alongside as we do, continue our work and continue our research. You will receive an email shortly after the webinar has completed from either Cecile or Jean-Michel, and that will have a number of links for you. I would really appreciate your feedback if you could take the time. It does really help me. Everything else there will be there for you. And we are offering special pricing for those who have been on the webinar or who have asked for the recording. We didn't make a big deal of that in the advertising. I didn't want to sound like I was trying to persuade you to be here. I just wanted to say that if you were here, we would like to make it possible to work with us, and we're trying to make it as affordable as we possibly can. Understanding that many of the schools who have not put through students yet probably don't have budget in place for things like this. So we've made it as affordable as we possibly can so that we can work alongside you. So just to end off, Cecile is going to chat with you very quickly. I just need to stop sharing my screen. Cecile is going to have a chat with you very quickly about something called Leadership Lab. And our next webinar up is going to be for first-year high school students, which we're hoping that you will join us on. So I'm going to just stop that share for now and hand over to Cecile.
Thank you, Sandy. We just wanted to, as a team, inform you that we are going to be soon we'll have a stream of insights presented about fortnightly or every 2 weeks, depending on timelines. But we would like to share some of Sandy's insights on a regular basis and thought to package it under the name of Leadership Lab. So that's something exciting that you can be looking forward to. Again, as I said, in trying to put that value forward and assisting you. So Leadership Lab with Sandy's insights coming up soon. Watch the space. We'll be using our dedicated social streams for that, and we'll be sure to inform you about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecile. And yes, Cecile is the one who talked me into that, because we are consistently researching and finding new insights. And she said we need to keep telling schools about this without bombarding them with information emails that take ages to read. So looking forward to doing that. And thank you for encouraging us. Just looking at the Q&A, Jean-Michel's not putting up her hand and stopping me. So I'm going to assume that we don't have any questions in there. However, if you do think of a question, you are very welcome to email us once the webinar has concluded, and I will answer those personally for you. So just to say thank you so much again for joining us. It's been a pleasure to present for you this evening. And for anyone who that we can assist and would like to work alongside us, I look forward to working with you and working with you to develop our future leaders, in which we all have a very vested interest, as they will be leading us one day. Okay, so I'm going to say good night, and Cecile, all the South African participants will be saying good morning, and I will be signing off, and we'll be sending the information out. Bye for now.